In the late summer of 1994, the Indianapolis suburbs were buzzing with fear. Quiet neighborhoods, the kind where people left their doors unlocked and waved to one another across freshly mowed lawns, were suddenly plagued with rumors. Men, mostly young, mostly in their 20s, were vanishing. They would be last seen at bars, nightclubs, or walking along the street, but after that, nothing. No phone calls, no bodies, no explanations. Families filed missing persons reports, but the cases piled up in dusty folders, dismissed by some detectives as runaways or troubled lifestyles. One man, however, couldn't ignore the pattern. Detective Tony Harris had been working missing persons for years, and he knew when coincidences were piling up too neatly. In several cases, witnesses had described the same man, a tall, middle-aged figure with sandy brown hair and a disarming smile, seen chatting with the missing men before they disappeared. He often introduced himself simply as Herb. Harris began digging. The more he looked, the more the same name surfaced: Herbert Richard Baumeister, a successful businessman who owned several thrift stores in the Save-A-Lot chain. He lived in a sprawling Tudor-style mansion known as Fox Hollow Farm, a 6,000-square-foot estate on 18 acres of lush, secluded land. From the outside, it looked like the embodiment of the American dream. But something about him didn't add up. Baumeister had an odd reputation. To neighbors he was distant, even cold. Employees whispered about his unpredictable temper. His wife, Julie, confided to a friend that he was eccentric, sometimes staying up all night to pace around the house or disappearing for days without explanation. Their children were forbidden to enter the basement, which Herb kept locked, telling them it was too dangerous. It wasn't until Harris spoke with a survivor, an anonymous man who claimed to have narrowly escaped, that the full horror began to unfold. The man described being invited to Herb's estate after a night at a bar. Herb had been charming, offering drinks by the pool and a late-night swim. But once inside, things changed. Herb became predatory, aggressive, suggesting a game involving strangulation. The man managed to laugh it off and leave, but he said the basement felt suffocating, heavy with a presence he couldn't explain. He had the overwhelming sense that others hadn't been so lucky. Detective Harris took the account seriously, but without bodies he had no case. Still, he made a note to keep a closer eye on Herbert Baumeister. He just didn't know yet that beneath the perfect facade of Fox Hollow Farm lay a graveyard, a dumping ground for horrors that would soon shock the entire nation. It would take one terrified wife, a desperate search, and the discovery of thousands of bone fragments to unravel the truth. Herbert Baumeister seemed to live in two worlds. In daylight he was the portrait of suburban success, business owner, husband, father of 3 with a mansion that turned heads. He appeared on local TV, interviewed about his thrift store chain, boasting about his entrepreneurial spirit. He mowed his lawn meticulously, waved stiffly to neighbors, and drove his children to school. On paper he was respectable. But once night fell, a different Herb emerged. He frequented gay bars in downtown Indianapolis, slipping away from his family under the excuse of late-night business meetings. Witnesses remembered him as awkward, sometimes too eager, but always looking for young men who were alone. His tactic was consistent. He'd buy drinks, strike up conversations, and then casually suggest a drive to his estate, promising swimming, drinks by the pool, and a little fun. Most of the men who left with him were never seen again. Julie, his wife, knew something was wrong, but she couldn't name it. Herb's mood swung wildly. He could be quiet and withdrawn for days, then suddenly explode in anger over trivial things. He stopped sharing a bed with her years before, telling her he was too stressed for intimacy. The basement door was always locked, and if she asked questions he snapped at her. "Don't go down there," he'd say flatly. But the strangest thing was the smell. One summer evening in 1995, Julie walked past the edge of the pool house and caught a stench so powerful she gagged. It was sour, pungent, unlike anything she'd smelled before. She asked Herb about it and he waved it off. "Just a dead raccoon in the woods," he said. "I'll take care of it." But the smell returned. Again and again. Meanwhile, Detective Harris had started connecting more missing persons cases to Herb. Young men, many of them gay, were vanishing in the same pattern. Their families described them as responsible, not the type to simply disappear. Harris pushed his department to investigate further, but without hard evidence, the case stalled. Still, the detective's gut told him Fox Hollow Farm was hiding something unimaginable. The truth began to surface when Julie, increasingly fearful of her husband, stumbled upon a discovery. One afternoon, while Herb was away, she ventured into the garage. On a high shelf, inside a box, she found a human skull. Her blood turned to ice. Julie froze, staring at the hollow eye sockets, the yellowed bone. She couldn't breathe. When Herb came home later, she said nothing. Fear wrapped itself around her throat. But the image of that skull haunted her. Days later, she confided in her lawyer, who urged her to go to the police. When she finally did, Detective Harris knew this was the breakthrough he needed. But getting onto Herb's property wouldn't be easy. They needed a warrant. And Herb, unpredictable as ever, was starting to unravel. He had no idea that his carefully hidden graveyard was about to be unearthed. Detective Harris had been waiting for this moment for months. When Julie Baumeister finally gave her testimony about the skull she had found, the police had enough leverage to push for a warrant. But Herbert was clever and well-connected. Word spread that he was under suspicion, and before investigators could act, Herb seemed to sense the walls closing in. He grew erratic, spending more nights away from home, vanishing for days without explanation. Julie, terrified for herself and her children, filed for divorce and cooperated fully with police. That gave Harris the opening he needed. On a humid summer day in June 1996, officers rolled onto Fox Hollow Farm with a search team. The property, sprawling and secluded, looked deceptively calm under the sunlight. The mansion loomed with its polished brick and trimmed hedges, an image of wealth. But Harris felt his stomach tighten. He knew they were about to find horrors that would redefine his career. It started near the woods. One officer called out after spotting a strange scattering on the ground, tiny fragments, grayish-white, mixed into the soil. At first they thought it was animal bone. But when they sifted through the dirt, they realized the fragments were human. As the team fanned out, more pieces emerged. Jaw fragments. Vertebrae. They were everywhere, littering the property as if the earth itself had been trying to spit them out. Behind the pool house they found a pit. Ashes were mixed with charred bone. Forensic experts would later conclude that Herb had burned his victims in open fires, hoping to reduce them to dust. But he hadn't been thorough. Scattered across the estate were thousands of bone shards, representing dozens of men. Detective Harris stood silent as evidence bags filled with skeletal remains. The sheer scale was incomprehensible. This wasn't one or two victims. This was a graveyard. And it wasn't carefully hidden. It was everywhere, woven into the soil of Fox Hollow Farm. Neighbors were stunned as word spread. Reporters swarmed the gates. Families of missing young men flooded the police line, desperate for answers. Some would later discover that their loved ones' final moments had taken place in the swimming pool room, where Herb allegedly strangled his victims during sex acts, watching the life drain from their eyes before disposing of their bodies. Inside the mansion, investigators found evidence linking Herb to several disappearances, IDs, clothing, jewelry. The basement reeked of chemicals. But the most haunting discovery was psychological. The sense that this home, this perfect suburban dream, had been built upon a foundation of horror. And yet, Herb was gone. Before police could arrest him, Baumeister fled. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind his family, his business, and his empire of bones. Detective Harris now faced a chilling race. They had unearthed one of the largest crime scenes in Indiana's history, but their killer was still alive, and desperate. The manhunt for Herb Baumeister spread quickly across Indiana and into neighboring states. His face was plastered across newspapers and television broadcasts, the image of a clean-cut businessman turned suspected serial killer. The public was captivated and terrified. This was no ordinary fugitive. He wasn't just running from the law. He was a man who had lived a double life for over a decade, hiding his monstrous nature behind the mask of suburban respectability. Herb's wife, Julie, provided investigators with crucial insight. She told them he had always been secretive, prone to vanishing for business trips that never made sense. He had been erratic in the weeks before the search, paranoid, pacing at night. She suspected he had stashed money somewhere, preparing for an escape. Police traced him through scattered sightings. He was reported in Michigan, then Ontario. Each lead sent detectives scrambling, but Herb always seemed a step ahead, traveling under false names, sleeping in his car, avoiding hotels. Meanwhile, forensic teams back at Fox Hollow Farm were piecing together the scale of his crimes. Experts estimated that Herb may have killed at least 11 men, possibly 20 or more. The remains were so fragmented, so thoroughly burned, that identification was nearly impossible. Families of missing men gathered in agony, clinging to the hope that their loved one's fate would be confirmed. For many it never would. By late June 1996, Herb crossed into Ontario, Canada. He stopped at Lake Huron near the town of Grand Bend. Locals remembered a strange man at a small roadside park. gaunt, restless, muttering to himself as he sat in his red 1989 gray Buick. He camped out there for several days, sleeping in his car, avoiding contact. Witnesses said he would stare out at the water for hours, as if weighing some final decision. He was drinking heavily, leaving empty beer cans scattered in the grass. On July 3, 1996, park rangers discovered the Buick parked in a remote area. Inside, they found Herb Baumeister's body slumped behind the wheel. A .357 Magnum revolver lay on the seat beside him. He had shot himself in the head. Beside him was a note. In it, Herb rambled about his failing marriage, his financial troubles, and the collapse of his business. Strikingly, he made no mention of the murders, no acknowledgement of the remains unearthed on his property. His final words painted the picture of a man undone by personal failures, conveniently omitting the monstrous legacy that would forever define him. The news hit Indiana like a thunderclap. On one hand, relief, Herb was gone, no longer a threat. On the other, frustration and horror. He had taken his secrets with him, denying closure to the families of his victims. He had escaped justice in the most cowardly way possible. Detective Harris stood in silence as the report crossed his desk. It was over, yet it wasn't. Dozens of families still had no answers. The bones at Fox Hollow Farm still whispered unanswered questions. And the man at the center of it all had chosen silence. But even in death, Herb's shadow lingered. Rumors spread of accomplices. Some believed he hadn't acted alone, that others may have lured victims to the farm. Others whispered that more bodies lay hidden in places yet to be searched. Fox Hollow Farm would never again be just a mansion. It had become a symbol of horror, a reminder of what evil can hide behind the facade of the American dream. In the weeks following Herb Baumeister's suicide, the investigation shifted from the pursuit of a fugitive to the grim task of uncovering his legacy. Fox Hollow Farm became a crime scene unlike any other, an eerie estate where the idyllic veneer of wealth and success masked unspeakable horrors. Forensic teams continued their excavation, sifting through soil, ashes, and charred fragments of bone. Day after day, investigators unearthed small, brittle pieces of human remains. Many were no larger than a coin, some blackened by fire, others reduced to white dust. There were hundreds, possibly thousands, of fragments. The grim question loomed: how many lives had been extinguished here? DNA technology in the mid-1990s was still primitive compared to today, making identifications painstakingly slow. Out of the countless fragments recovered, only a few victims were ever positively identified. Most families would never know for certain what happened to their missing sons, brothers, or lovers. The cruelty of it, killing them was one thing, but denying their families closure was unbearable. The media swarmed around the story, branding Herb Baumeister the I-70 Strangler, though that connection was never definitively proven. Still, the parallels were chilling. Young men disappearing along interstate highways, their remains scattered like discarded trash. Herb had been a family man, a business owner, a figure of suburban respectability, and yet behind closed doors he had hunted vulnerable men in Indianapolis gay bars, lured them with promises of parties, and led them to their deaths in the pool house or woods of Fox Hollow Farm. Neighbors who once saw him as eccentric now remembered unsettling details. His tendency to burn large bonfires late into the night, the pungent smell of burning meat drifting across their yards, the strange mannequins arranged around his indoor pool. Suddenly, the quirks they had dismissed as harmless took on a sinister new meaning. Julie Baumeister, now widow and mother of 3, was thrust into the harsh spotlight. She faced scrutiny from both the public and investigators, though she was never charged with any wrongdoing. Some accused her of ignoring the warning signs. Others pitted her as another victim of Herb's deception. She claimed she never knew the extent of his crimes until the evidence began surfacing. The truth may never be fully known. But perhaps the most haunting legacy was the house itself. Fox Hollow Farm remained a mansion with a curse, its walls soaked with secrets. After the Baumeister estate was sold, new owners moved in, only to report strange occurrences, voices echoing in empty rooms, footsteps in hallways, figures glimpsed in the woods at night. Paranormal investigators soon descended on the property, claiming it was one of the most haunted locations in America. Visitors told of feeling sudden chills near the pool area, of hearing faint cries when walking the wooded trails. One man described the overwhelming sensation of being watched, followed by a flash of movement, like someone darting between the trees. Another swore he heard a voice whisper his name while standing alone in the basement. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the atmosphere at Fox Hollow Farm is undeniably heavy, oppressive, as if the ground itself carries the memories of those who died there. Yet even with Herb gone, the story refused to end. The unanswered questions gnawed at detectives and journalists alike. Did he kill alone? Was he responsible for all the men missing from the Indianapolis gay scene in the 1980s and 90s? Or were there others, perhaps an accomplice, perhaps a network, that still walked free? Detective Harris, long retired, would later admit in an interview, "We never closed the book on Baumeister. He took the truth with him. And every time another young man disappeared in the Midwest, part of me wondered if we were looking at the ghost of Fox Hollow all over again." The families of the missing were left to carry their grief, their questions unanswered. Their sons vanished into the dark orbit of a man who hid his monstrosity beneath the mask of normalcy. And for those who visited Fox Hollow Farm, they said one thing was certain. Herb Baumeister was gone, but the voices of his victims still lingered, whispering through the trees, demanding to be heard. The end of Herb Baumeister's story was never truly an ending. His death in Canada closed one chapter but left behind a lingering, poisonous echo that spread far beyond the walls of Fox Hollow Farm. What remained was not only the bones in the earth but the questions that no one could answer. Police reports noted that Herb had left no confession, no letter, nothing to explain why he did what he did. There was only silence, broken by the whisper of wind through the woods where his victims' remains still lay. Families wanted closure, but all they had was uncertainty. For some, the lack of answers was worse than knowing the truth. Rumors grew in Indianapolis. Some believed Herb had not acted alone. Witnesses claimed to have seen him with other men, working in pairs, trolling bars, picking up strangers. The possibility that there were more predators out there, still free, kept the community on edge. Detectives hinted that the full scope of Herb's crimes might never be uncovered. Perhaps he had killed far more than anyone realized. Perhaps Fox Hollow was just one graveyard among many. The mansion itself became an icon of horror. Paranormal investigators arrived with cameras, thermal sensors, and recorders. They left with footage of unexplained voices, sudden temperature drops, shadows crossing empty hallways. One team captured what they swore was the sound of men gasping for air in the pool area. Visitors told of hands brushing against them when no one was near, of a man's silhouette pacing along the woods at dusk. Even skeptics admitted, something about the estate felt wrong, as if the ground itself rejected peace. But the most unsettling accounts came from those who stayed overnight. They described dreams so vivid they felt real. Visions of running barefoot across frozen soil, of being dragged back into the darkness of the woods, of drowning in the pool while laughter echoed overhead. Some woke with bruises, scratches, or the sensation of hands pressing down on their chest. Whether these were the tricks of fear or the cries of spirits, no one could say for certain. Herb Baumeister's children grew up carrying the weight of his name. Some changed their identities, desperate to escape the shadow of their father. Yet for those who lived near Fox Hollow, the estate remained a scar on their community. Every bonfire smell in the night, every missing persons poster pinned on a streetlight, reopened the wound. Even today, people driving along I-70 whisper about the Strangler, about the men who vanished into thin air. Some insist that not all of those disappearances can be tied to Herb, that another killer, or killers, may still be out there. The road feels cursed, as if stained with the memory of those who never made it home. The true horror of Herb Baumeister's story is not only the deaths he caused but the facade he lived behind. He was a husband, a father, a business owner, the neighbor next door who waved as he mowed his lawn. He embodied the terrifying possibility that evil does not always wear a mask. It can smile, shake your hand, and invite you over for dinner. And so, the legend of Fox Hollow Farm endures. A story of a man who hunted in plain sight, who buried his sins beneath the soil of his own backyard, and who left behind a trail of shadows that still stretch across Indiana. Late at night, when the woods are quiet and the pool house windows catch the moonlight, some swear they see movement. A figure standing still, watching. Sometimes it looks like Herb. Other times it looks like the men he took. One thing is certain, Fox Hollow Farm will never be just a house. It is a monument to the darkness that hides in ordinary places. And for those who dare to walk its grounds, there is one warning whispered in the silence. Don't stay too long. He may be gone, but the farm remembers.